Some of you may have noticed when I took the oath of office, I moved it from where it normally is at. It's normally off the east wing. There's a bust there. You might guess who the bust is. You referenced that person in your comments. I moved it to around the corner to where the Constitution's at. The state Constitution is encased in the rotunda of the Capitol. And the reason I did that, and it actually, Lord, goes to a point you raised about spending, because in the state's Constitution, one part of the Constitution that's never been amended, never been altered, talks about spending. It's the frugality clause. Talks about spending in this context. It says that moderation and frugality leads to freedom and prosperity for our people. It's worth repeating because it's never been changed. Moderation and frugality lead to freedom and prosperity for our people. And so when I think back now, in our case, the state's got a few more years on the WMC, not many, about 163 years, so about a 63-year head start. But it's interesting to think about, just as those who saw it fit to start out what now is today the state's Chamber of Commerce and one of the premier Chamber of Commerces across the country, so was it with our founders back in 1863 when they saw fit to chart out a course that many of us have sought to go back to in leading the state forward. You know, sometimes you go back to things like happened in the past, and you can see what's happening when Illinois has done that this last year, where they go backwards and truly take the state backwards. Higher taxes on businesses, higher taxes on individuals, instead of dealing with their structural problems. I remember on that prediction, Mitch Daniels and I had to compete as to who was going to jump in the Chicago market quick enough to go after Springfield when they did that. And I made a prediction that within a year, the folks in Springfield would be back at it because they'd have to fix it. I was wrong. It was 6 months. 6 months later, they found out that raising taxes on individuals and businesses, instead of helping their budget climate, instead brought about an $8 billion deficit. About a month ago, they had to lay off thousands of public employees, shut down 7 facilities. They still have about a $5 billion deficit. Anybody who's on the edge of competing between Illinois or Wisconsin, it's a pretty good sales pitch right now to stay in Wisconsin and grow in Wisconsin, because when you look at it, they've got literally a pension system that's about half funded. They've got a bond rating that, if it weren't for California, they'd be dead last. They're at a point now where even their comptroller and treasurer said to the bond rating agencies they wouldn't even recommend buying their bonds. Conversely, we have a structural budget that's not only the first time in a decade and a half that's been balanced, but it's balanced in terms of structural changes that put us in a place for both our state and our local government to be solvent long into the future. I like to say it's about thinking more about the next generation than we did about the next election. But taking a step back, you say, okay, what does that have to do with that report? Well, I think in a way having your state and your local government being structurally sound is incredibly important for economic status in the state. I remember back a few months earlier this year, and I was doing interviews with publications from around the country and around the world in some cases, as well as those from here in Wisconsin. One day there was somebody from Reuters sitting in my conference room, and he said, you know, there's a lot of, our readers like stability. They're investors. They want to be in a place where there's stability. Said some might say there's a little instability going on around the Capitol. What's your reaction to that? And I said, well, great question, but you're 180 degrees wrong in your assumption. You see, what you see is momentary political instability, momentary political unrest. But what will become of it is long-term structural changes that will provide us permanent stability in our markets, in our governments, both at the local and at the state level. That makes it one of the best places in the world to invest in. I think that's incredibly important because, as I mentioned at that forum, Doug talked about a little bit earlier this summer, there were a number of us, 6 governors in total, and I identified at that gathering 2 things I thought at that time were key to economic recovery here in Wisconsin and around the country: certainty and confidence. Certainty in the marketplace and confidence when it comes to consumers. Now, I would add to that, since we've held roundtables around the state. You mentioned the one yesterday in the Madison area. I was just in La Crosse early today at a jobs announcement. I've been in La Crosse and Green Bay and Eau Claire and Milwaukee and all their parts, listening to job creators like all of you here. And I heard that you know, one of the best things government can do is provide certainty, stability, confidence. Now, we can do things that help get out of the way, or at least let you know what the circumstances are so you can plan for it. Have regulations, for example, that are science-based and predictable. Do things that provide certainty so that you know your stable marketplace, you know that things aren't going to come at you in other directions, and then you all can figure out how you're going to conquer the marketplace out there. That also in turn instills more confidence from the consumers, because as they see employers being more stable, they see them hiring more people. Just like I was at Reinhardt Food Service earlier, and it was like a couple days ago I was over at Bastista's Bakery in Franklin and other places around the state where we make job announcements. Every time there's another job announcement like that, it not only instills confidence in other employers, it instills confidence in the marketplace, in consumers. Consumers say, you know what? Maybe it's time that the economy is starting to head in the right direction. So I think that's incredibly important. Those two things are things, and I'll touch on them in just a second here. But the other big thing, and that was mentioned in this report, that I've heard time and time again, is the need for a skilled workforce. I remember I had a forum in Milwaukee at the chamber there, and it was interesting. About halfway through the presentation, one of the job creators, one of the business owners who was there said, you know, I came in and there were a couple protesters on the way in, and one of them had this big sign that said, where are the jobs? He said, I got jobs. I got lots of jobs. I just don't have workers who are skilled to meet the jobs that I have available. So the void isn't a lack of jobs out there. We have at the state's Department of Workforce Development, we have a website that's merely a portal. It's not a competition to an employment agency or anything else. It's merely just a portal for job creators to put up job postings. You know how many job postings we have open today? About 34,000. 34,000 job postings on jobcenterwisconsin.com. So people say, oh, there aren't enough jobs out there. Well, it's not just as simple as saying create more jobs. It's the fact that we have jobs in the state, particularly in the areas of manufacturing. We just don't have enough skilled workers to match those jobs. That is a challenge for us. That's something we're going to act on. And that Kurt and I were just talking about. So that whatever state gets that is going to have the competitive edge over everybody else across the country and around the globe. And that's something that we're committed to act on and to lead on and be at the forefront of. Because the other areas we're helping to address. You know, some of the things that were mentioned up there, it's interesting, thinking 10 months into this year, we attacked early on in January some of the things that we thought were challenges, some of the things that you would have written a year ago and report about, instead of being enhancements or positive about Wisconsin, they would have been negatives. It addresses that certainty issue. We talked about tort reform and regulatory relief. We talked about tax relief, not just in general, but tax relief directly tied to those individuals, those businesses that are creating jobs in this state. Relief from things like the state tax and health savings accounts, and even the public-private venture that was talked about with the new creation of the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, where instead of having all those different silos of programs, some of which were disconnected with where the actual jobs are, instead now we've got a public-private entity that can say, you want to bring jobs to the state? We're going to put together a package that helps you do just that. That's what we've done thus far. Now, first 6 months of this year, you saw the numbers from 2009 to 2011. The interesting thing is, just in the first 6 months, particularly after we took that aggressive action in the first 4 or 5 weeks of this year, realizing we weren't going to wait a year or 6 months or even a month, we were going to act right away. After doing that, we saw a couple interesting indicators. First 6 months of this year, private sector in Wisconsin created nearly 40,000 new jobs. That's double the rate of the national economy. On top of that, and I know we talked about not having rankings, and that's good for us, although we're competitive as governors. We like to compete. It's why we talk a lot at governors' associations about the Badgers and the Packers, and up until Sunday about the Brewers and other things like that. 2 out of 3 right now is still not bad, although it was a heck of a good season for the Brewers as well. But, you know, it is good to have a goal. We have a clear goal. Hopefully everybody in this room knows my goal is to help you create 250,000 jobs between now and 2015. We're well on our way to doing that. But we also know that when we change the business climate, we change the climate in the state, provided more certainty, more stability, when we changed our financial climate and addressed both our fiscal and economic crises that we faced in the state of Wisconsin, that had an impact. It had an impact internally and externally. Internally, it had an impact with the survey you do every year, where last year 10% of all the people surveyed, job creators said, only 10% said Wisconsin was heading in the right direction. This year later, after all these reforms, 88%. 88%, a solid majority saying we're going to add jobs in the next 12 months. Externally, when we look at rankings, you know, there's all sorts of different rankings out there. The one I was interested in, Chief Executive Magazine surveys 500 CEOs. Historically, we've been somewhere between 40 and 50. 2 years ago, we were 43. Last year, we were 41. This year, after all these reforms were started, we went from 41 to 24, up 17 spots, fastest increase of any state in the country. In fact, fastest increase in the history of the CEO survey. All those things are important because it gives us benchmarks. We broke the top 25. We want to aim for the top 10. Eventually, we want to take on Rick Perry and Bob McDonald and Governor Herbert and others who are in the top 1, 2, or 3 in terms of best states to do business in. Because if we create a better business environment, not only do you fare better, but ultimately you're going to hire more people. All the time politicians talk about jobs. The mistake most politicians make, including some Republicans, is they think that we create the jobs. We don't create the jobs. We create an environment that is either better or worse, positive or negative. And right now, we're doing all that we can in our power to create a better environment. That's why I'm glad today some of our lawmakers are across the way and not here. They weren't with me in La Crosse because they're in session. We brought in another special session to focus on jobs. These are a little bit more nuts and bolts, bread and butter type issues than the ones we brought up earlier in January. But nonetheless, we're tackling issues that provide more certainty, that let us navigate through the regulatory environment, that help ease the litigation environment, that add more tax relief and incentives out there. But after we get that completed in the next couple of weeks, the next big thing we're going to need your help on, not just with WMC as an organization, but with individual employers across the state, is working to address the gap between jobs that are available and the skilled workforce. For us, that means a combination of resources. It means taking our technical schools, who, despite the talk of things in the budget where we reined in spending, the reality is we gave our technical schools, just like we gave our local school districts and our cities and our towns and our villages, our counties, we gave them the tools, the more than make up for the changes in the state budget. That's why you hear about, Oshkosh that saved $3.7 million, or Appleton that saved $3.1, or Kaukauna, the best example probably of all out there, where they took a $400,000 deficit and turned it into $1.5 million surplus. That allowed them to hire more teachers and lower classroom size and even set money aside for merit pay. Well, that happened in our technical schools as well. We need to take particular technical schools, our workforce investments boards, all of our workforce-related programs and say, instead of just putting it out there as a blanket, one of our next quests and where we're going to need your help and participation in helping us piece this together is we need to target it. For us, one of the goals, and we've heard it repeatedly at these job creator listening sessions, is that gap between the jobs available and the skill sets that are needed to fill those jobs. That's a short-term issue. Long-term, it's even bigger because we're just starting the early stages of the baby boomers just starting to creep into retirement age. That means even after this recession and the aftermath of that starts to ease up and the economy improves, and hopefully Wisconsin's leading the way throughout all of that, we have an incredible challenge. Because to keep and grow employers in the state, we've got to have a ready, skilled, working workforce. We can't wait for that. I like to think great challenges bring great opportunities. For me, it says if we do this and we do this right and we're leading the way, we can see a massive surge of more jobs and more employers coming into the state, because employers like you and others will say, this is a place we want to be. This is a state that understands workforce development, that it's not just about throwing money out there hoping that things will happen. It's about connecting and saying, here are the jobs, here are the people looking for work. Let's take the finances we invest in workforce development and connect the dots, so that the training we're providing, the incentives we put in place, the financial assistance, and everything else we do to help people with a 2-year or a 4-year or whatever degree they might be looking for matches where the jobs are. For us, to me, that's a prudent investment. That's a good investment of the taxpayers' dollars. That ultimately goes back to what the founders talked about frugality and moderation in government. It's about saying, let's be frugal, let's be sensible, but let's also be practical and put our resources where they have the greatest impact. I think we've got an incredible opportunity to do that. We've got an incredible system when it comes to our technical schools, our colleges, and our universities in the state, both public and private. We have $1.2 billion worth of academic research and development, largely driven by our flagship here at the University of Wisconsin. We have a unique opportunity, but we've got to make sure we connect all the dots and not just hope that if we just throw a little bit out there, that it'll all come back in the order we expect it to. We need to drive that. We need to focus that. We need to put it in the place where it is the greatest benefit to the employers of the state, so we can ultimately put more people to work. So that's the reaction looking at what was presented out there. I think we have certainly some challenges, but I think we have some unique opportunities as well, because we are poised to be in a position to take advantage of the competitive advantages we have. One last little aside, I get pumped up about this, so I won't steal from the panel's time too much here. But when you think about the percentage of manufacturing, I mean, think about it. 163 years in this state, manufacturing, agriculture, and tourism have built the state's economy. Now we have emergency industries in life sciences and biotech. We have water technology in southeastern Wisconsin. We have all sorts of emerging clusters that we need to focus in and expand. And we even have with Oshkosh and Marinette Marine some great new defense contracts that have subsidiaries that go off of that. We have not only clean energy, but we have some great opportunities in the state when it comes to saving energy and making money off of that and the tools that we can invest in terms of helping companies grow here and around the country and around the globe. But in the end, our bread and butter is still manufacturing. It's manufacturing, agriculture more than anything. We do that exceptionally well. We have a workforce that's well positioned for that. We do it better than anybody in the world. And what's been interesting is touring the state quite a bit with businesses. I was just at a company at Johnson Controls the other day, or excuse me, not Johnson Controls, at Johnson Creek. I was at a place where they showed me a section of their plant where years ago there had been 12 employees doing this work. And a couple decades ago it went over to China. Talk about China prices. It went over to China because it was more competitive. They were very proud to show me that work had just come back a couple months ago, but instead of 12 people doing it, there were 3 people doing it. The reason was because 15, 20 years ago, they had 3 shifts with 4 people each shift doing all that work. That work went to China because they couldn't be competitive in terms of the payment of wages versus what they were paying in China. But when they were able to invest in capital and automation, they could then bring that work back because the quality, it was tied into the worker who ran, the 1 worker per shift instead of 4 per shift, who ran that automation, was more than able to compete when you factored in transportation and fuel and all the other issues that go with having something overseas out there. We can compete. We can compete, but we've got to be smart about it. We've got to be strategic about it. We've got to understand that we've got to give manufacturers in particular, but businesses overall, the capital investments and the ability to take capital and reinvest it in automation and innovation and upgrades that give us a competitive edge over anybody over the world. And then we've got to make sure we've got the workers who have the skill sets to run those pieces of equipment to continue to keep us competitive. We already have companies that do that. We have the intellectual capacity to expand on that. We just need to make sure we connect the dots, and working together, we can do that to make sure more people work here in the state of Wisconsin. Thanks for letting me react.